Okay, let's talk about epithelia. Um, Epithelia are tissues that form most of the surfaces of our body. They line the internal cavities, they line the external of our body. In general, an epithelia is a single layer of cells that are tightly packed. So in cross section, an epithelium is going to look something like this. There's my epithelial layer at the surface, but this is in cross section. Deep to the epithelium is deep to all epithelia is connective tissue. So let's draw some fibroblasts and some collagen or reticular fibers or whatever, deep to that. And the junction between the epithelium and the deeper connective tissue is a structure called the basement membrane. And the basement membrane contains molecules that are secreted both by the epithelium, or the epithelial cells, and the fibroblasts. Okay, epithelial cells have different shapes. You can read your textbook on these, but essentially the shapes are going to be highly regular. They tend to be something like cuboidal or columnar. An important epithelial shape that will come up again and again in this class is a squamous epithelium, in which the cells are squashed flat like that. Squamous. Okay? All right. Epithelial cells are held together by specialized junctions. The junctions might hold them very tightly. They might be a little bit loose. If they're a little bit loose, you've got tiny gaps in between the cells. If they're tight, you don't have gaps in between the cells. So the leakiness of an epithelium can vary depending on what epithelium that is. And by leakiness, I mean how much transport of molecules in between the cells. From the surface here, here's the surface, here's the deep tissue, all right? So the transport through that. One exception to a single layer, or there are several exceptions to a single layer of cells in epithelia. An example is the epidermis of the skin, which is multiple cell layers thick, okay? All of the epithelia that I talk about are going to be single layer of cells. All right. An epithelial cell is highly polarized. And we used that word when we talked about polarized molecules. Polarized, I said that I defined polarized as meaning that there's a certain direction or an axis, okay? An axis of variation. And the axis of variation here is from the surface to the connective tissue, right? And we call the membrane of the epithelial cell at the surface the apical membrane, and we call the membrane of the surface joining the connective tissue the basolateral membrane. And it's typically called the basolateral membrane because if I were to draw the epithelium a little bit more correctly, it might look something like this. And you can see we have a little bit of lateral surface, okay? That distinguishing the apical membrane from the basolateral membrane is extremely important because epithelial cells will express some specific proteins only on the apical membrane, and they'll express other specific proteins only on the basolateral membrane. So that expression of different proteins sets up in general, an axis of transport. Okay. One of the things that you see in a lot of epithelia that are transporting molecules out onto the surface is a polarity of the organelles, or an organization of the organelles that looks something like this. So I'm going to make a bigger cell here. So here's the basolateral surface. Here's the apical. So this is the surface, or the lumen. This is the basolateral membrane, the apical membrane. This is the lumen of the tube, say. Okay? And we typically have a nucleus located basally, endoplasmic reticula, Golgi, and secretory vesicles. So if you remember, I said that these organelles create the machinery to synthesize proteins that are going to be either inserted onto the membrane or secreted. And in these specialized epithelial cells that are secreting onto the surface, secreting molecules onto the surface, tend to have this organization of these organelles. So you can just think of these proteins that are being secreted as moving in this direction. Okay? An example might be digestive enzymes, where this could be, say, an epithelial cell in a duct of the pancreas. And the digestive enzymes are proteins, and they're synthesized on ribosomes here, and they're packaged into the endoplasmic reticulum, and then move from the ER to the Golgi to secretory vesicles that fuse to the plasma membrane, the apical membrane, and exocytosed from the cell. Okay,